If you've watched this channel long enough, you've probably noticed just how much I love pro wrestling. And to me, the best part has always been the characters. I love a great pro wrestling character. To me, it's what makes the whole thing worth watching. And because wrestling's been around for so long, there's never been a shortage when it comes to the variety of different gimmicks. There's been soldiers and psychos, demons and dragons, wild men and whatever this counts as. Wrestlers take inspiration for their characters from all different avenues. There have been characters inspired by cartoons, characters inspired by movies, characters inspired by video games. Hell, there have been characters inspired by other wrestling characters. But the most fascinating ones are the ones inspired by real people. There's just something so odd about watching how a fake sport—
Wrestling's not fake!
Let me rephrase. There's just something so odd about watching how a not real sport incorporates real people. And like all things in life, the results vary. Some of the characters are great, some of them are bad, and some are absolutely bananas. Okay, a lot of them are absolutely bananas. But there is one that is without question the most bananaist. A character that enraged fans, but not as much as the religious figure he was based on. To be fair, the people had a right to be angry. After all, it was some of that figure's followers who were responsible for the largest bioterror attack in American history. This is Pop Culture Hyperfixations, and today we're taking a look at Portland Wrestling's own, the Mega Maharishi.
I am the bird in the tree that sings. I am everything about the Northwest that you wish you could be.
Our story begins in August of 1981 when a relatively unknown religious group out of India traveled to Oregon to purchase a sprawling piece of property known as the Big Money Ranch. The group were known as the Rajneeshes, and nobody knew it at the time, but their presence in Oregon over the next several years would ignite a firestorm of conflict and controversy. Now, the story of the Rajneeshes in Oregon is so crazy that Netflix did a 6-hour documentary on it called Wild Wild Country. I don't have that kind of time. So what I'm sharing in this video is very much the abbreviated version of the story. And at the beginning of the story, the Oregonians who encountered the Rajneeshes found them to just be a bit eccentric. They came from all across the world dressed in red and followed a holy man out of India known as the Bhagwhan. While the Bhagwhan had taken a vow of silence and rarely appeared in public, his followers could still see him in his Rolls Royce on his daily drives around the compound. And before anyone asked, yes, I think he was one of the inspirations for the leader in the Joy of Sect episode of The Simpsons. But despite some skepticism from Oregonians, there wasn't much conflict in the beginning. As far as the locals were aware, the Rajneeshes bought the ranch with the intention of starting a small farming community. It wasn't long though before they realized that wasn't the case, as the Rajneeshes were able to legally form their own city Rajneeshpuram, and that's when the conflict really began. It was within weeks of officially moving to Oregon they began plans for a massive expansion with the hopes of a city that the Bhagwhan said would hold 50,000 Rajneeshes. By incorporating their own city, they could streamline their expansion without any red tape from the government. They were the government. This drew the attention of local ranchers and environmentalists who opposed the expansion due to land use concerns, especially when it came to the local water supply. Normally a story like this would be kinda boring to talk about, but the Rajneeshi response was anything but boring. While the Bhagwhan didn't speak, his second in command spoke loudly and proudly, and her name was Sheila. She was the voice for the Rajneeshes, and she would not be silenced. She loved getting the media's attention and loved giving provocative statements. Like the time she told a reporter, the Rajneesh is a far superior race than any Oregonian is. And soon those Oregonians would find out that Sheila was not just talk. The Big Money Ranch was part of Wasco County, and the county's government was able to stop the expansion. Undeterred, Sheila and the Rajneeshes turned their sights to a small neighboring town called Antelope. Depending on what side of the story you believe, the Rajneeshes either persuaded or intimidated enough citizens to sell their homes to them. This allowed them to move enough members into the town where they could win the local election and reconfigure the town in their image. Legally, they had done nothing wrong, but the optics of the locals was that a religious sect had basically invaded their town. To a lot of people, a fear developed that if they could do that to Antelope, they could do it anywhere. The Rajneeshes, the Bhagwhan, and especially Sheila became reviled in Oregon. You know you've reached a special level of hate when morning DJs are writing songs about you.
Shut up, Sheila, on the news we see ya, saying words you should not say. She's a red disaster, that is why we ask her to dry up and blow away.
As tensions between Oregonians and the Rajneeshes grew, Sheila made sure the Rajneeshes were prepared for any potential conflict. They developed their own police force and were not shy of showing off their firearms on camera. The message was clear. The Rajneeshes were willing to defend their home. Frustrated with the roadblocks put up by Wasco County, Sheila attempted to pull an Antelope, but on a far greater scale. She set her sights on winning elections in Wasco County, but to do so, she was going to need to boost their ranks. In what must have been a coincidence, around that time they began recruiting unhoused people from all across the United States to join the commune. I don't know if they ever outright said as much, but it was pretty clear to most observers that what they were trying to do was increase their membership so they could win seats in the election. People across not only the county, but Oregon as a whole, were freaked out at that prospect. Luckily, their fears ended up for naught, as due to some legal maneuvering, the Rajneeshi plan did not work, and they failed to win any seats in the election. The locals rejoiced. Democracy had prevailed, and they had prevented another takeover from happening. The Rajneeshi threat was over.
You didn't think it was going to be that easy, did you? You know, for a second there? Yeah, I kind of did.
In another startling coincidence, after the election, the Rajneesh began kicking out unhoused people they considered a problem and dropping them off in random parts of Oregon. Incidents like that just inflamed the already heightened tensions. Not only was this story not going away, it was picking up steam. You know it's bad when stupid Curtis Silva and the Guardian Angels travel from New York City to get their berets involved. You couldn't turn on the news in Oregon without an update on the latest happenings on the story involving the Rajneeshes, Sheila, and the Bhagwhan. Everyone was following it, including a local pro wrestler named Ed Wiskoski. A former college football player out of Missouri, Ed began his career in 1972 after training with the legendary NWA champion Harley Race. In those days, wrestling operated in a territory system. The country was carved up with various promoters being responsible for various regions. So Ed traveled America, honing his craft, and trying to find a place he could really make a name for himself. And in 1977, he would find that place, when he found himself in Portland, Oregon. There he'd begin working for Don Owen in Pacific Northwest Wrestling. Portland was a smaller territory than most, but the wrestlers were dedicated and the fans were incredibly passionate. Going by the moniker Easy Ed Wiskoski, he formed a tag team with the greatest bad guy in Portland wrestling history, Playboy Buddy Rose. Together, the two of them ran roughshod over the promotion and feuded with the likes of Rick Martel, Jimmy Snuka, and Roddy Piper. He settled down there, and for many years it was his home base. But wrestling is still a business of vagabonds, so in 1980 he left the promotion for a few years to travel across the United States and Europe, including a very brief stint in the WWF as the Polish Prince. He returned to Portland under a mask as the Convict in 1983, but in 1984 resumed wrestling in Portland as himself, and really emphasizing the Polish Prince gimmick. He would speak of how worldly and intelligent he was as he insulted the people of Oregon. And as the weeks went on, the characterization gradually shifted, until one week a man who looked like Ed Wiskoski came out, but it wasn't Ed Wiskoski. It was the Mega Maharishi Ahmed.
Pun.
Unfortunately, we don't have his first appearance on tape, so we can't see the crowd react to seeing someone come out who is so clearly modeled on the Rajneeshes and the Bhagwhan. Overall, there is a limited amount of Mega Maharishi footage, but what we do have is nothing short of incredible. Ed Wiskoski fully commits to the bit, but without a doubt the best part are the promos, especially when he reunited with Buddy Rose, and well, here's just a sampler.
But because Bobby Jaggers was shot in the rear end, he received no Purple Heart because he was running. The man was running from the Viet Cong. Look here, Miss Jeannie St. James, before she joined the Mega Maharishi Foundation, was admittedly a loose woman.
All right, that's 19 inches.
Right, not even pumped. And that's without the use of anabolic steroids, which some men obviously do. But her mother tells me that now she's joined the Mega Maharishi Foundation, she's straightened up. She's even coveting her bosom now on television. Also, Bobby Jaggers, I heard he's got an Agent Orange claim against the government and against the manufacturers of Agent Orange. Bobby Jaggers, your whole life is nothing but confusion and lies. The only truth is when you step in the ring with Buddy Rose or the Mega That's the only real truth in life.
Wiskoski said in interviews that his time as the Mega Maharishi was the most fun in his career, and some of his most lucrative. Part of his whole shtick was his pleas for the audience to help his Mega Maharishi fund. And as a Slam Wrestling article about Wiskoski explains, he would ask fans for donations to the cause, like any good cult leader, and people would throw money. Mega Maharishi would make the referee pick it up. The money was all his, but $10 or $15 was a good haul, he recalled, adding that he would share the wealth a bit and cut in local promoter Sandy Barr and the other helpers. He even had one fan that would send him $20 in the mail every week. The first time she wrote a letter, she said, "I'm not doing so well, so I decided to cast some of my bread on your waters." Even though the character is so funny to us now, at the time he garnered tremendous hatred from the fans. Unfortunately, we only have word of mouth to go by, but all indications were that the crowds loved to hate the Mega Maharishi. A hairdresser named Jeannie Van Dorn, speaking to the Vancouver Columbian, once explained why the Mega Maharishi made her so angry. "He is such a snot. He is self-opinionated. I don't like people like that." According to that Slam Wrestling article, his wife feared for his safety, but Easy Ed wasn't fazed. He was having too much fun. But while Wiskoski was having a good time as the Mega Maharishi, the actual Bhagwhan was having a terrible go of it. Not only was he under investigation from the federal government over accusations of immigration fraud, but a schism had developed between him and Sheila that ultimately saw Sheila flee the compound. However, the worst of it was revealed in September of 1985. That's when the Bhagwhan made a rare public appearance with a bombshell. According to him, Sheila had successfully perpetrated the largest bioterror attack in American history under everyone's noses.
I am shocked. I am shocked. That's what I mean. I am appalled.
Let's flash back to 1984. Around the same time as the Wasco County election, there was a major salmonella outbreak at several local restaurants that saw hundreds of people come down with food poisoning. The outbreak was blamed on poor hygiene by service workers, but it turns out that a group of Rajneeshees acting under the orders of Sheila had cultivated salmonella and infected local salad bars. The plan seemed to be to incapacitate enough voters that they'd be too sick to vote in that election. Crazy, right? You know what else is crazy? That wasn't the only thing he accused her of. He also accused her of the attempted murder of his doctor, a conspiracy to murder several elected officials, and a plan to poison the water supply. I want to be clear that by all accounts, the Bhagwhan and most of the Rajneeshi had no idea any of this was going on. But at that point, I don't know if the people of Oregon were willing to make that distinction. This obviously launched a huge investigation and added another wild layer to the story. Oh, now I get it. The kind of accusations that were leveled against Sheila were the kind you'd see levied against a supervillain. I don't think I can stress this enough. She was allegedly thinking about poisoning the water supply. Now keep in mind, during all this, there was a guy on local TV dressed in Rajneeshi garb saying stuff like this.
270,000 acres were destroyed. 2 billion board feet of timber lost. Do you realize how much that is? How much it cost the great state of Oregon? They could have contributed all that to the Mega Maharishi Fund had they been brave enough to fight that fire. 3,000 Oregonian men went out to fight that fire and they couldn't put it out. Not one of them was brave enough to try to save this state.
Of all the lost Mega Maharishi footage, the footage I wish we had the most is footage of him after the poisoning story went public. Not that it might have mattered though, as the actual Bhagwhan story would quickly come to an end. Within a couple months of Sheila's departure, the Bhagwhan was arrested for immigration fraud and voluntarily left the country. In quick succession, the city of Rajneesh was disincorporated, the Big Muddy Ranch was sold, and life in Oregon got back to some semblance of normalcy. Even after the Bhagwhan left, Ed Wiskoski still wrestled as the Mega Maharishi for a few months. During my research, I found results for the Mega Maharishi in Memphis, but it turns out that was a completely different one.
But I got spiritual help. I got my friend here that I've imported, and he belongs to me and Bill. His name is the Mega Maharishi, and he's casting me spells, and he's doing spiritual things for me to be successful against Phil Hickerson. Not that I need it, of course.
That Maharishi was portrayed by a journeyman wrestler named Jerry Gray, who had spent time in Portland and was so impressed by the gimmick, he tried to make it his own. He wasn't the only one impressed by Mega Maharishi, as the American Wrestling Association wanted to bring Ed in based on the strength of his performance. The only problem was the AWA was a national promotion, and the Mega Maharishi was a regionalized gimmick that had already kind of run its course. If he was gonna go national and get the same level of hatred he got in Portland, he was gonna need to find something new. And so, I swear I'm not making this up, he became the racist South African military man, Col Debeers. And I mean actual racist, like calling Nelson Mandela a terrorist and refusing to wrestle with a black referee kind of racist. In an industry where people can sometimes push the envelope, Col Debeers threw it off a fucking cliff. And because wrestling is insane, Col Debeers became his most successful character. It's a gimmick that you couldn't do nowadays, and probably shouldn't have done then. But to Old Easy Ed, there didn't appear to be a line he was unwilling to cross. I'm not saying it was right, but it seemed like his philosophy was to get people to hate him by any means necessary, and he absolutely did that. After the AWA closed, Ed continued wrestling across the country for a little while, before retiring in the early 2000s. For a few years, he ran a wrestling school with Playboy Buddy Rose that, fun fact, trained wrestling YouTuber Brian Zane. After his time as a trainer ended, he left the wrestling business minus the odd appearance here and there. Sadly, Ed Wiskoski passed away earlier this year at 80 years old. In making this video, I struggled to figure out how to encapsulate him. A performer whose whole philosophy on wrestling villainy was to push the boundaries further than most people are comfortable. How do I bring this all together and sum up a man that seemed to be one of a kind? Well, the answer became much clearer once I found footage of his return to Portland in the mid-90s. By that point, Pacific Northwest Wrestling was dead, replaced by a much smaller independent outfit known as Championship Wrestling USA. And at the center of it all was Col Debeers. But this time the character was a little different. He had actually added a religious angle to the gimmick, and as you watched his interviews, you could see him flash back to the early days of the Mega Maharishi. For a brief moment in time, he had successfully found a way to combine his two most famous creations. But in typical Ed Wiskoski fashion, he just had to take that extra step. You see, while the Mega Maharishi was raising money for the Mega Maharishi Ahmed Fund, Col Debeers was raising money for a church. The Church of the Aryan Nation.
Are you serious?
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, hit the like button. If you want to see more, please hit subscribe. And let me know in the comments what's your favorite insane wrestling gimmick. I really want to know.